Hello, welcome. Hello, Rick and Suzanne. Giving time for people to log in. Well, welcome to those who are joining. If you wish, say hello in the chat. Also, tell me how my audio and video are doing. Can you hear me clearly? Everything good on that end? All right. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Yankee. Welcome, Yankee. All right. So we'll give it another minute or so, then we'll get started. Hello, Suzanne D. All right, I think we can get started. So, Bhante and Aya have asked me to cover tonight on Monk Chat. So here I am for the next 2 hours or however long we need. We have time for questions. So, if you have any questions in the realm of Buddhism, meditation, monasticism, etc., feel free to type those questions in the chat. We will go as long as there are questions, or 2 hour mark, whichever one ends first. Oh, nothing in the chat. Oh well, good night, everybody. No, no, I'll give obviously more time than that. Suzanne has a question. Venerable, the suttas mention many aspects to emphasize, such as sila, samadhi, hindrances, noble truth, etc. What do you feel should be emphasized for lay practitioners? All of it, the whole thing. There's no part of the practice that is just for monastics. It's all for anybody who is following the Noble Eightfold Path. So if you really want some kind of something to focus on, if you focus on developing the Noble Eightfold Path, you'll be developing all these aspects. Now, if you're developing the Noble Eightfold Path, you're developing Sila, you're developing Samadhi, you're understanding the hindrances and overcoming them. Right? You're slowly understanding the noble truths. So that's what I would say. Don't feel that anything is kept away from you in that regard. But, to keep it simple, just think about focusing on the Noble Eightfold Path. Everything fits within that path, all the practices. So that's what I would say for that. Hello, Bill, Kumu. All right, Rick seems to have a question. Over the decades, my practice of not killing or harming has become part of my being. However, I notice that I get triggered sometimes. I feel a strong drive to protect those who cannot protect themselves, such as children, animals, elderly, disabled, etc. When they are harmed, I have vivid thoughts and images of harming the perpetrator. And I feel a strong drive to harm them to protect those who are vulnerable, Ajahn. Do you have any guidance? You know me long enough, Rick, to know that Ajahn is not the right word for me. Even in the Thai tradition, usually they don't call people Ajahn until at least 10 Vasa. But I will never, ever be called Ajahn because I'm not part of that tradition. It's a cool name, though. It's a cool title. I don't mind it. So, but anyway, to your topic. This is an inbuilt aspect of our brain, our evolution, that we really dislike people who harm people that we like. And the Buddha's teaching is teaching us to go beyond that. To go beyond the us versus them, the oppressor versus oppressed narrative. To reflect on that this person harming is also a being in samsara. This person harming has also experiencing suffering. So, and when you really look at it, you'll see that it's connected to some kind of attachment or like. These are my protected groups, and anybody who goes after them, I hate them. I'm going to go against them. I have free reign to attack them. This is the normal mindset, the normal human mindset. But the Buddha encourages us to go beyond that. So that doesn't mean, if you have, like you say, these thoughts and images arise in your mind, it's okay. You don't need to feel guilty. You don't need to berate yourself that they arise in your mind or anything like that. If you're trying to practice lots of metta and go beyond it, you just recognize it for what it is. This is part of my normal habitual way of thinking. And this doesn't necessarily lead to anything wholly skillful. Indeed, this line of thinking can lead to lots and lots of really unskillful things. Done so specifically because the person feels that they are the moral justified one in doing it. This is a big trap that one must be wary of. If you're a practitioner, you have to be wary of that trap to make sure that you are not causing more harm than good. So when these things arise in your mind, question them, investigate them. If me acting out on these thoughts, if I act out on them, what will happen? Will that really be for my good and the good of others? Or for my harm and the harm of others? Question and investigate it. Understand it. I understand your mindset. I have also had that mindset throughout most of my life. That's why all my professions were people helping professions. I understand, but still, it has to be done with wisdom or you can cause a lot of harm. Hello, wise man say. Hello, Carol. Hello, Metika. Hello, Kristen. So, wise men say, only fools rush in. Um, as a layperson, is there a way to want/crave something skillfully out of necessity? I'm hungry. I want to go out to eat, or my socks have holes in them. I need a new pair. Thank you. Um, I think you can make a distinction between want and need here. If you need a new pair of socks, then you can get a new pair of socks. Maybe you want or you crave that specific, more expensive brand of socks. Do you really need it? Sometimes that might be the case. If you're going, deep backwoods in the snow, a good pair of wool socks is actually something you really need, you know. But sometimes it's just not. It's just a craving for something more than what you need. So I wouldn't necessarily, it is craving to fulfill your basic needs. It is. But it's a different level than going above and beyond to have more than what you need. That's what I would say. The most skillful craving is the craving that leads to the ending of all craving. And if you are examining your craving and doing what you need to do and not going overboard, then I would say that is training yourself in a way that would lead to the ending of craving. And even as monastics, like I just I wore the same t-shirt to bed for like the last 7 years of my monastic life. And finally, the other day, I just looking at it, it had 4 or 5 holes. It was literally threadbare. And I was like, okay, I can't use this anymore. This is, I have other shirts, so I just use that. But I figure, I try to only use one thing. I don't need, even when coming to Colorado, I'm like, oh, it might be cold. I have to bring some warm clothes, but I don't need a ton of things. I just, So I actually, I unceremoniously retired that old, 7-year-old shirt that I wore every night by doing the Hulk Hogan. It was so easy. I just went like this, and it just ripped right apart. That's how threadbare it was. In monasteries, we'd use that for rags, for cleaning rags. Oh, when there's a time, there's a time. It's like when I had my first robe and it started to wear out and I started to have to make patches. And I was so excited. I'm a patch monk. I'm like an austere ascetic monk, just like the monks of the old days. And then it came down to Katina, and the lay people wanted to give me a robe, and I was avert. I'm like, I don't need another robe. I'm a patch monk. And then I realized, oh wait, I'm craving. I'm identifying. I'm causing. I'm craving. You might say, oh, to be like an ascetic monk, that's a good craving. And yes and no. But once I realized that I was craving and identifying, I said, okay, I got to let it go. And I let the lay people give me a robe. And that's how it's been since. Like there's been times where I just want to be like, I can just sew this. I don't, I'm just fine. But the minute, good Buddhist lay people see that my robe is a little, wacky or whatever, then they'll throw 10 robes at you. That's just how it goes. So, all right. Hello, Daniel. How does the fifth khandha differ from pure awareness described by many teachers? First of all, I have no idea what pure awareness is. Pure awareness can be anything. So, what I like to do is connect things to a Pali word. And I don't know that there's a word for pure awareness. Maybe the closest to would be sampajanya, clear comprehension. Maybe they're talking about clear comprehension. I'm not sure. This is the problem with the tons and tons of teachers and the tons and tons of words that they use. And this is why I always go back to the Pali, right? Whatever this teacher's word is using, I have maybe no idea what the heck they're talking about. But are they at least basing it off is it a translation from a Pali word? Then I can kind of understand it. Then I can see where they're coming from, and it makes sense. So I don't know. I can't really talk about what this pure awareness is of these teachers. I would have to know exactly what they're talking about to make any kind of comparisons. But the fifth khandha, we have the five khandhas, the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. Now, consciousness is, in Buddhism, just like in science, is one of the most complicated topics because it's really hard to really understand what it is. The Buddha puts consciousness, when asked what consciousness is, puts them in relation to the sixth sentence: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. So consciousness is not clear awareness or clear comprehension. I'm going to just go by assuming maybe they're talking about complex comprehension. Consciousness does not need to be mindful. It's just consciousness. But clear comprehension needs consciousness to be there. You cannot be knocked out or sleeping or dead and have clearly comprehend what you're experiencing. You cannot do that. So consciousness is the basis of any kind of investigation and understanding. You have to be conscious and awake to be able to be mindful and investigate. So I think that's the best I'm going to be able to answer that question. That's a piece of advice that I put to you. if a teacher uses a word, ask and see if they know if it's connected to a polyword. Because if it's not, then it's really just the teacher's whim, and you don't know if you can really trust that. Because who knows what they're talking about, what they really mean. you know. Kristen says, "What is reborn after death? I notice that Ajahn Brahm says a stream of consciousness continues, but am I guessing that he means consciousness is part of the five aggregates or not a soul?" This is a very complicated issue. It's thought differently depending on who your tradition and who you're talking to. Because I've tried to nail this down. And the problem with saying that consciousness continues is that you are assuming some kind of consistency from life to life, when this is not the case. I think in the suttas, to me, the suttas are much more inclined to say that when you're gone, the five aggregates are gone. And when you have a new existence, you have a new consciousness. In the suttas, the Buddha really only, when the Buddha is talking about what goes on, the only sutta that I really that I've really like seen where the Buddha talks about this is he just says the mind goes on. And well, some people will say, well, in mind, there's consciousness, there's this, or this. Maybe, I don't know. One of my acharya for my ordinations, the not the preceptor but the teacher. So the two people who ordain you. One's the preceptor, one's the acharya. And my acharya and a monk who I have a lot of respect and love for, Bhante Silananda, a Sri Lankan monk who lived at Bhavana Society for a decade. The way he described it is that a subtle forms of the five aggregates go forward. And although I can see maybe, I remember investigating this, and this is years ago, I remember investigating this, and there is a sutta or two that you could kind of, you could interpret as that, but I wasn't sold on the idea. And the bottom line is the Buddha was not clear about this. Why? Because it really doesn't matter. It's not really conducive, to the goal. So you'll have different teachers, different traditions have different perspectives on that. When this is something like this is something that I vividly just remember spending years trying to figure out myself. Even before I was teaching Dhamma, like, okay, what does this monk say? What does that monk say? What is it? And then it's like, how do I put what this monk said and that monk said together? I don't know. But in the end, to be honest with you, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't lose sleep wondering if the same consciousness goes from life to life. I don't lose a nanosecond of sleep on that. All I know is if I don't become awakened in this life, I'm gonna be reborn in the next one. So. What I would say though, I guess, yeah, no, I think I'm gonna to end that there. What we are is just processes. That's what we are. We're processes that come together. We're processes that break apart. We're processes that arise and cease. That's what this being is. That's what existence is. Processes moving according to causes and conditions. Hello, Mary, Bhumika, Mean, Dharma Learner. Right. Moving on to the next question. All right, Rick has a question. Do you have any guidance on how to use the Dhamma when experiencing nightmares or night terrors when events have triggered a strong trauma response? So, when something like this happens, okay, so you had a trauma response and then you went to bed and you had nightmares related to that. And that would make sense. That would definitely make sense because if you went to bed with that mind state being the most active, then it's naturally going to transfer. Just like in the benefits of metta, right? The Buddha says the benefits of metta, one goes to bed peaceful, one wakes up peaceful, one has no evil dreams, right? Because their mind is in metta. So it makes perfect sense. So what I would say, maybe if you have a trauma response, if you have a really strong, aversion or anger or sadness or fear or whatever, maybe wait a little bit before going to bed. Maybe chill, do whatever you need to do, whether listening to Dhamma talks, you know, even some form of entertainment or whatever you need to do to kind of move your mind slowly into a more calm and peaceful uh, place, and then try to go to bed. That's what I would suggest in that. When you have a trauma response, when you have these kind of triggers and things that are arising, and oftentimes they can be so overwhelming that you really lose control. You don't really have much. I've experienced this with my eating issues, where my body has moved without my will to go to the kitchen to get some food and things like this. Right? Sometimes it's just so strong, you just lose your power over it, and that's okay. Right? Again, it's not a time to berate yourself or whatever. But what I found is, even when I'm really sick or depressed or whatever, the minimum I can do is at least to try to watch it, to investigate it, just watch, see what I can learn from it. That's the minimum. In those situations, I know, okay, that's all I can do. At least I did something. Right? At least I tried to learn about this, tried to understand it. And when you do that over and over and over and over again over years, then you start to see the causes and conditions that lead to the trigger or the response. And you get more skilled at heading it off at the pass. You get more skilled at knowing how to manage it before it gets too overwhelming. Carol says, thank you for this discussion of pure awareness. It's confusing. Yeah, yeah. That's why, for my own sanity, I have to go to the Pali. The thing is, maybe because of past life, maybe whatever, even in my early Buddhist days, I never was into learning from a bunch of like lay teachers and various different teachers, and I went straight to the monastics. And I pretty much went straight either because of my karma or because what I was inclined or was what was available. I went straight to Sutta monastics, Thanissaro Bhikkhu. Right? Ajahn Brahm is a Sutta monastic to an extent. And I would say to a great extent he is a Sutta monastic. Um, sometimes he veers off into interesting places, but for the most part, he is a Sutta monastic. Um, and I would say even more, many of the monastics under him are more Sutta monastic than even he is, like Ajahn Brahmali, Bhante Sujato, etc. So, yeah. But the way I view my job as somebody who's sharing Dhamma is to try to make it so that what took me years to figure out, you can understand in less time. That's my goal, because I didn't have most of my practice. I didn't really have anybody, and nor did I have a lot of ability. There was no like monk live streams back 2007, things like this. That just didn't, basically didn't exist. There was pre-recorded stuff that was put on YouTube, but you can't like have a monk chat and ask a monk a bunch of questions back then. So a lot of times I just had to try to figure it out for myself, learn and listen and try to figure it out and understand it. Dharma Learner says, my trip appears not too much. You appear vibrant and energetic. Yeah, I'm always happy to be in Colorado. I get to see the Rockies when I go for my walk every day. I get to get some training in. Like the elite athletes go to Colorado to train in the higher air because it's harder. So I'm getting some good elite athlete walking in a couple miles a day. Gonna probably do some pindapats, I think, just some local pindapats while I'm here. Yeah. So, and it's also good when you're in one place for so many months. It's kind of refreshing to get to a new place. So I'm also kind of having that experience as well. This is a good question by Wise Man. Over the years, have you had any challenges with being a monastic in a non-Buddhist country? There's lots of challenges of being a monastic in a non-Buddhist country. One of the things you learn fairly quickly as a monastic is that for a monastic to live the holy life and follow the Vinaya as the Buddha wants us to, you really need to be in a well-supported monastery. And there's only a handful of those, if that, in America, or even in most Western countries. Most monasteries in America are either immigrant monasteries like, Sri Lankan monks, Thai monks, fully supported by immigrant Thai people, immigrant Sri Lankan people. And so they kind of have imported their traditions over to America. Right? And so they have the whole system is in place. And so they just basically like picked it up and brought it down. And that's a benefit to monastics like myself, is like I'm trying to see if I can, eventually moving to Colorado and start a vihara here and then a monastery years later and all that stuff. And I have some lay help, which I'm staying in a lay person's house right now, a lay gentleman who's been really helpful to me. But most of the places that I'm able to really stay at in Colorado so far are with other monks, right? It's just last time I was here, I I went to stay at with Thai monks in Colorado Springs, and I had those of you who are familiar with Empty Cloud, I had Torah call the monastery because they don't really speak much English. I had Torah call the monastery from New Jersey and see if I could come stay for a week. They don't know me. They don't know who I am at all. But they said sure. And I stayed with them for a week last April, and it was great. Some of them spoke decently broken English. I could communicate with them, but even still, it's an interesting experience. But if you are like a Western monastic trying to start their own place, trying to move into a place that isn't very heavily populated with Buddhists, you have a lot of hurdles to get over. Just a lot of them. It's not, because in Buddhist countries, you have people who are masters of practicing dana. They know how to support monks. They know the benefit of monks. They know why monks are so important as part of the fourfold assembly. That's not necessarily the case for Westerners. Right? Some of them, like myself, I learned fairly early on the importance of monks. Right? Mostly because that's what I was able to, learn from them. And I was so grateful to the very few, less than a handful of monks that actually decided to have a YouTube channel and share the Dhamma. Because back then, no Zoom, no streams, no nothing. So all these, it was really a very impactful thing for me. Somebody and has no Dhamma near them, no Buddhism near them, all these things. So no, it is. There are many challenges. Well, I'll give you many examples. I've cooked as a monk at Bhavana when there was nobody else to cook. Bhante Ji needed some food. I cooked. Now, you could say by Vinaya, in certain situations, the Buddha has already set a precedent that monks can cook. So it's not that big of an issue. But in traditions like Thailand, first, that's like a big no-no. You don't cook. And I agree with them. I do agree with them. And if I am able to start my own monastery and have people under me, I would not want them to cook. Again, not because it's against the Vinaya, but because it's supportive of their practice and who they are. Another thing I've had to do as a monastic is drive. Again, technically not against the rules, but in many Buddhist countries and traditions, not seen as something monks should be doing. I've also had to use money. I remember a bunch of stuff had to go to a local landfill dump from Bhavana, and there's just nobody. This was a time for almost 2 years where there was no long-term residents, so I was doing a lot of extra stuff. And so I brought it to the dump, and I knew from working with my father and doing things in lay life that they don't take credit cards, so it has to be cash. So I was a bhikkhu and I had cash on me, and I gave it to so all of these experiences made me real. And Bhavana is a pretty well supported place. It's not a rich place by any means. They've always just survived by the skin of their teeth for almost 40 years, but still fairly well supported. And I still had to do these things. So this is the hard things about being a monastic in the West when you're outside of the traditional spheres. So it is what it is, and sometimes you have to be a bit more flexible. It's all been a good lesson for me because I know that if I can, I want my monastics, when I am a senior monastic training monastics, to be more in line with, the Thai forest. However, Thai forest is way more supported than I, as an individual person starting an organization, will ever be. So I will probably also have to be like, I did this at Bhavana, so it's your turn now, even though I don't like it. Um, so it's there's lots of challenges without a doubt. When you're traveling, there's things you probably shouldn't have to do, but when you're traveling, and even monks like Ajahn Brahm, they don't travel with an entourage. That can get very expensive for the donors. And I asked Ajahn Brahm this question when I first met him. This is probably 6 or 7 years ago when I first met him about that. And he says, you know how expensive it is to bring me around? I'm going to go with an entourage and things like that. It makes things easier for a monastic. It just does. Like, for instance, one time I was going going to DC to catch the bus to go up to Buddhist Insights to lead a retreat. And the traffic was so bad, what would have been an hour and a half drive took 3.5 hours. So I just totally missed my bus. And I had to get a new bus. And they're like, okay, no problem. We can switch you over. It's just a $20 fee. And, I had like a little debit card, that just for emergencies. So I just, okay, here, no, it has to be cash. So I, as a bhikkhu, had to take this debit card, go to the ATM, put it in, get $20 out. That was probably the last time I actually held money in my hands, and give it to the person. If I had a lay person there with me, no problem. I wouldn't even have to touch the money. But that's not realistic. That's not how it is. It's so, yes, there's a lot of concessions and a lot of to live I feel in my heart very deeply that I want to live as the Buddha said. My disciples do not, even for the sake of their own lives, even transgress the minor training rules. There's such a deep desire for me to live like that. However, there's also the pragmatic side of me that says that doesn't exist in the West. And if you want it, you're probably going to have to try to create it. And even then, it might not be a fully workable solution. I don't know. So even Abhayagiri, which is probably one of the most well-supported monasteries in the country, they too have to every once in a while make some concessions. Nothing major, but they have to as well. And they're about as strict to the Vinaya as I've ever met, as I've ever visited. All right. Hello, Malika from down under. Good morning, Malika. Hello, Sud. Hello, Shivi. Sudha. Louisa. Chandini. Chandni. Manal. Hello, Karuna. Kumu, David. Oh, hey, David. All right. Okay. So now we are up to Kumu's question. I was just reading Majjhima Nikaya number 38 before logging in, and the sutta addresses this very specific question. Bhante, your thoughts on the Mahatanhasanikaya Sutta and looking for the answer to this question. Is this the question about consciousness? To be quite honest with you, I don't know the contents of that sutta off the top of my head. I'd have to read it I'd have to really kind of look at it to understand, and to have a comment on that. The ending of craving, yeah. Right. So was there a specific thing regarding that? Oh, the question on what moves into birth. Oh, all right. Okay. Now I understand. Yeah, this is quite a long sutta, and I don't want to I don't want to spend too much time going over it. But if there's a specific part of it that you want to point me to, you can put that in the chat. I have it up on my desktop. Um, Seems like teachers like Ajahn Suchar and Lungpor Sumedho are talking about a type of awareness that is unconditioned. Unconditioned. Have you seen anything about that in the suttas? Yeah, there's only one thing that's unconditioned. That's nibbana. So unless they're talking about some kind of awareness in the state of nibbana, uh, I wouldn't use that word for that. I don't know too much about Ajahn Suchar, but I don't see Longpor Sumedho as much of a sutta-based teacher. So I've read a few of his things over the years, just never really connected with me. Um, but again, that the only unconditioned in the suttas is nibbana. I don't see how an unawakened being can have any kind of awareness that's not conditioned. All right. David Bhante, my minuscule understanding of K, I'm assuming karma, is that intent is the or a determining factor. With 20 years practice in military, intent seems to be the important factor. Is this a valid thought process? So your actions, the Buddha encourages us to be mindful and skillful in our actions in both aspects. Intentional action, and unintentional action. When you intentionally do something, you are creating karma. When you are unintentionally doing something, you're not really creating karma. But that doesn't mean you're not necessarily creating harm or suffering, right? So if the traditional, the easy simile is if you're walking down the street, you step on an ant. If you didn't intend to do it, there's no bad karma. You were just walking. Your intention was not to kill anything. You stepped on the ant and killed it. Which we're doing all day, every day. If you're walking, if you're driving, you're just killing animals left and right. If you're farming, that's just how it goes. But then the Buddha also understands that we can still cause a lot of harm by unintentional, unmindful actions, which is where the Buddha is talking to his son Rahula and gives the simile of the mirror, where the Buddha says that we are to be mindful and to reflect before, during, and after we do an action. Before we do this action, will this lead to my benefit and the benefit of others, or my harm and the harm of others? While we're doing this action, is this action leading to my benefit and the benefit of others, or my harm and the harm of others? And if you realize before you do the action it's going to lead to harm, you don't do it. If you realize while you're doing the action that it's leading to harm, you do your best to stop doing it. And then afterwards, this action that I did this lead to my harm and the harm of others, or my benefit and the benefit of others? Right? So there's two different aspects of your action that you should be mindful over. Just because you unintentionally hurt somebody doesn't mean that you shouldn't make amends, apologize, whatever, right? It's just, oh, it wasn't my intention. No, if you unintentionally, unmindfully cause harm, you should make amends for that and apologize, etc. And that developing that keen mindfulness, that keen awareness of what you are doing and why you are doing it will allow you to more intentionally act skillfully. And act unskillfully, unintentionally, much less. All right. Kristen says, how is your travel experience like? Do people chat with you in the airport? Almost never. Every once in a long while, maybe like once a year, somebody will chat with me in a public place while I'm traveling or on a bus or a plane or whatever. But normally, most people, well, first of all, let's be honest, everybody is soothed by the box, either their phone or when you're in a plane, the movie right in front of your face. So everybody just locks into the box. I mean, obviously, as a monk, I don't. So I just basically either, look out the window, which I love doing. I could look out the window for 5 hours of a plane, no problem. I've been doing that since I was a kid. I love flying, looking out the window. Or I just read, or I sleep. So I don't particularly believe that I give off vibes of unapproachability. I think just most people either just don't care or they're just busy doing their own thing. They're not going to bother or whatever. I think I had more interactions with the public as an anagarika and as a samanera than I have as a bhikkhu. And I traveled way more I really, Bhante didn't allow me to travel to teach until I became a bhikkhu. I only taught at Bhavana Society for the year that I was a samanera. And I have lots of interesting experiences, at least 3 that I can remember that I enjoy. I still think about fondly to this day. But since I've been a nomad monk, very rarely does somebody talk to me. Their minds are on the boob tube. Or they're just introverted. Shivi says, is it really possible to live without saying a word? Please, Bhante. I guess it's probably possible, but I don't know why you do it. The Buddha called monks who tried to live with a vow of silence foolish. You need words to communicate. People who are deaf or mute or whatever they've developed sign language and things like that. But there's no real point or need to try to not say any words. How can you even develop one of the whole, you can't develop one of the major aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path without saying words, right? Speech, right? Some people will think that, I really am having trouble being mindful with my speech. It's better that I just shut up and I never talk ever again. That's the unwise reaction to this. The wise reaction is, let me watch my speech, how I interact, why I respond in certain ways that I do. And then when I do that, I can adjust and be mindful and try to speak more wisely. How to lessen our food intake requirements so that we may survive eating very less food. Please guide us. So, what I would say is the first thing you'd have to do is train yourself with the mindset that food is only for the nutrition of this body. And that's a hard thing to do because it's a human universal that food is a bonding agent. It bonds families, it bonds strangers, bonds communities, right? There is more to food in human social life than just eating for the maintenance of your body. But this also leads to, well, the food's there, I'm just going to eat it. You don't really need it. It's like, I don't know. I think this was proven not really to be that true, but like one of the historical what you call it, I don't know if that's a misconception, but I don't know if it's actually really that accurate. But one of the historical beliefs of like the ancient Rome was like the rich people would like gorge themselves with food and then go and throw it all up and then come back and gorge themselves with food again. Right? This, I mean, I'm sure it's been done. That is pure tanha. That's pure craving, without a doubt. But so the idea I think would be is, how much do you really need? In all honesty, I realized, like, me as a monk, I really only need one meal a day. My stomach is smaller than the average person's because of weight loss surgery, so I probably could use a bit more nutrient, but like, I've developed over the time where I only eat one meal a day and then some allowables at night, some cheese and chocolate or whatever. Um, and that, if in that one meal I'm getting the nutrition that's good for my body, it's perfect. If not, not so good. Depends. In vegetarian places, as I've said many times, I have to have breakfast or I just waste away. The last couple of months, I've been in places where the food is fairly carby, so I've gained weight. I probably want to lose about 15 pounds or so. But the next time I spend a long time at a vegetarian monastery, those pounds will just drop off because my body will start eating itself. So try to understand what exactly your body needs, how much your body needs. And as an American and an Italian, the son of Italian immigrants, both cultures which are like, the more food, the better, the bigger the servings, the better. What the hard thing for me was to realize, actually, our servings are ridiculous and we don't actually need that much food. The only exemption is if you're burning a lot of calories a day, if your career is like, something where you're working hard, like in construction or whatever, or you run marathons or whatever, things like that. Like before I was a monastic, I was really big into all kinds of heavy endurance events, like 12-hour, 13-hour endurance events, things like that. I was, lifting and, doing all kinds of like CrossFit, all these things. So my body could take some food, and for my body is kind of primed for like muscle gain and things like that. So I ate more, but as a monk, now where maybe I walk a mile or 2 miles a day, I don't need so much. So you have to kind of have that as a factor of, how much calories you're burning per day. People who are like doing like Arctic mountain climbing need something like 4 or 5 times the amount of calories per day than the average person. So it depends. And also you have to understand what your body needs, because most of us are. There's going to be lots of differences depending on your trying to think of the word, your ethnic background, right? Somebody who's Indian, somebody who's European, somebody who's Chinese, somebody, there's going to be different needs there. There's going to be lots of different factors that go into it. But the idea is all to try to move towards eating what you only really need. That's all. All right. I'm just going to take a drink. All right. Dear Bhante, how much should one let go of sensuality as a lay Buddhist? What did the Buddha say? Thank you. Do you have any tips on how one can lessen sensual desire since it hinders progress on the path? So the Buddha said, basically encouraged whoever, whether lay or monastic, to abandon as much sensuality as you're able. You know, when he talked to lay people who were a bit more advanced, he gave them more advanced teachings. It wasn't that, there's never been, at least in the suttas, in the early texts, you don't see this clear distinction of this is only for lay people, this is only for monastics. It was more about where the person is on the path. That is the most important thing. So, how much sensuality do you want to train letting go of? Right? That's the key. The more you go down the path, the more you develop the path, you'll just naturally want to let go of more. Why? Because you'll start to have wisdom and insight into the fact that these are not really as worth it as I thought they were. So you're just naturally not attached to them as much. You might still use them. You might still engage in that, but it's just not as enticing. It's just not, the argument for them is not as good an argument anymore in your mind. Just isn't. Just isn't. So he's like, yeah, I don't need this. It's like me, I've never in my 8 years in robes have thought for a second seriously about disrobing. But what I do reflect on is, by the time I got into robes, I had already reached a certain point where I know that if I were to disrobe, going back to normal layperson's things like sex and dating and watching TV, and all, I kind of was done enough with that before I became a monk, right? So it's like, I can't fool myself into having the same level of attachment to them that I did 16 years ago. I can't. I've gone, that doesn't mean that they don't have any sway over me. Sure, they do. But their power is greatly diminished to the point where I don't know that I would sacrifice something good for that, something much better. So, whatever you are able to let go of, that's what you let go of. If you are developing the Noble Eightfold Path, you will gradually, slowly let go of more and more. Where the Buddha says that this teaching is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, right? I'm sure, Sud, I know you've heard this. Definitely. I know you're knowledgeable of these things. Well, I like to say that the beginning of the Buddhist path is letting go. The middle of the Buddhist path is letting go. The end of the Buddhist path is letting go. From dana to nibbana, the whole path is letting go. Developing the ability to let go. So you let go of as much as you need to, as much as you can. And in the beginning, it might not be a much. It's okay. As you keep practicing, you'll let go of more. You'll want to. It'll just be natural. You won't even have to force yourself. You see this a lot with practitioners. Happened with me, right? You see this, people, instead of going partying or going to the club or whatever on the weekend. They go to the monastery. The average person is like, well, what the hell? What crack are they smoking or something? Whatever. Like, why are they? What's this about? But you've understood that I'd rather be in a more skillful place that encourages my practice. So you just let it go. I don't need the techno music or the dancing and the twerking or whatever the heck is going on these days. I don't need any of this. It's much more nice and peaceful to be at the monastery. And that's fine. So you let go as much as you can when you can. That's what I would say as an answer. So, do you have any tips on one could lessen sensual desire since it hinders progress? Follow the path. That's the biggest tip. Follow the path. The other thing, the Noble Eightfold Path, obviously. The other thing is the Buddha gives us the techniques to be able to do this. These are in what I call a grouping of words, the words that mean mindfulness. One is observing viparinama, the rise and fall. Observing how the sensual desire for something rises and how it goes away. The other is observing the gratification, the danger, and the escape. This is a very gratifying experience. Why? You examine why. It's not just, it's because of this. Why is overeating? Why is having good fatty food? Why is engaging in lots of sexual activity? Why is that all gratifying? And you go beyond the obvious, beyond it feels good. That's part of it, but there's more. You investigate it, you understand it. And then you understand, you do something that nobody else does. Only practitioners do. You investigate and you contemplate the downsides, the drawbacks, the danger to that activity. So you're observing both sides. You're observing why you're attached to this. You're observing the dangers of being attached to it. And the third, gratification, danger, and the escape. The escape is always the letting go of the craving of that thing. If there's no craving for it, you've let it go. You're not going to be attached to it. You're not going to want to do it. I mean, besides, basic bodily functioning. It's just, there's a lot of drawbacks to this. It's not that interesting. It's not that worth it. I'm not going to do it. And you've let go. Hello, Gregory. Hello, Sukishani. Hello, Jojo. How can one convert their Christian girlfriend into practicing Buddhist? You don't. This is not the Buddhist way. Buddhism is not a converting religion. It's similar to Judaism in that regard. It is a missionary religion, but it's not a missionary religion as you would see in the other Abrahamic faiths like Christianity, Islam. There's no, somebody knocking on your door saying, have you heard the good word of our Lord Buddha? There's no, convert or you die by the sword. There's none of that things in Buddhism. Buddha was very clear on this. Buddha literally made rules against it. I, as a monk, cannot talk Dhamma to somebody unless they've given me permission. I cannot knock on somebody's door and say, hey, have you heard about the good news of our Lord Buddha? No, can't do it, because that's not what we are. That's not what Buddhists do. So we should not be trying to convert anybody. that is forcing something on somebody that they might not want. We don't want to do that. If by our actions, by us being a role model, they start to question and investigate and want to know more, then talk to them. But we don't want to convert anybody. This is not the way. And also, somebody tries to convert us, also not the way. We don't have to accept it. We don't have to listen to it. We don't have to get wrapped up in it. Sorry, I'm a Buddhist. I'm good. No problem. You know, it is what it is. Hello, Jenny. Margaret. All right, Julie. Dear Venerable, when you were a lay Buddhist, did you prepare to be a teaching monk or it happened that way? How can one prepare for that? So I don't consider myself a teaching monk. I don't like to be, I don't like to even say that I teach Dhamma. I like to say I share Dhamma. I think that's a better way of, for me, of putting it. That's also how Bhante Ji was. Bhante Ji, I remember one retreat, he says, I'm not the teacher. He pointed to the Buddha statue behind him and he said, that's the teacher. I'm just a Kalyanamitta. And that was so like, that just hit all cylinders for me. That was just so perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. This was before I was a monk. Or maybe I was an anagark at the time, but I wasn't a bhikkhu at the time, I believe. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly how I want to be. I don't want to be a guru. If you're and people who are part of my online community, you know all the time. I just like always, don't give your agency to anybody. These kind of things. But I'm going off tangent. I knew that I would share Dhamma because I felt most monks share the Dhamma. I didn't expect to do it until I was probably like now, like 7, 8, 9, 10, because the only thing I kind of knew was the Thai forest model. In the Thai forest model, you're not really doing any teaching until you're an Ajahn, until you're like 10 years. And there's some benefits and some downsides to that. There really is. So I knew that I would be a teacher. I just didn't expect that I would start teaching when I was sharing Dhamma when I was a Samanera. That was not something planned. That was Bhante Ji. Bhante Ji told me to start teaching, and that's what I did. For the first year or so, I wasn't the only. There was a couple other young monks that he also had, to teach at retreats too. But I would record all their talks and my talks, and Bhante Ji would look at them. And after probably about a year, Bhante Ji said, I don't need to see your recorded talks anymore. All good. No worries. People tell me they love your talks. I've watched them. All good. And so it just happened that way. And I know it's extremely rare. There's probably not much more than a handful of monastics in the world that, at least in Theravada, I don't know Mahayana much. In Theravada, there's maybe a handful of monastics that have had the experience I have of being thrown into sharing Dhamma, into teaching at retreats that early. That's not very common. Now there is a Sri Lankan organization, very good monks, good Vinaya monks, everything, top tier monks, called Mahamevnawa. And they actually train their monks as anagarika to give Dhamma talks. Now they don't do it in public. They don't like have anagarkas give Dhamma talks to lay people, but they have them practice giving talks. Ajahn Chah did the same thing to his monks. I don't know how early he did that to them, but like Luangpur Sumedho, Ajahn Brahm, they have stories of Ajahn Chah says, start talking, and they have to talk, and then he says, okay, another hour, right? So I think that there needs to be, for those who are going to be inclined to want to share Dhamma, to teach, there needs to be some training in how to do so. For myself, as a layperson, part of my career was public speaking, right? So I trained and developed public speaking before I became a monk, right? So I already kind of had a leg up in that regard. And by the time I had been started to share Dhamma, I had been a Buddhist. Let's see, 2015. I've been learning Dhamma like 9 years, right? So it wasn't like I just started Buddhism and then I, became a monk and then I start teaching. So I had done a lot of study and practice and meditation even before I got to that point. Bhante Ji told me, he says, Jayasara, he says, you came to me a mature meditator. And this is when I was talking to him, because I noticed he was giving some of the younger new monks like more attention. And I'm like, I thought we're supposed to be trained. And I was like, he says, Jayasara, you came to me mature meditator. I was like, okay, Bhante, if you say so. And I'm the only one still ordained, by the way, which is interesting. All the others that ordained while I was there disrobed. But it is what it is. So yeah, no, I didn't prepare. I actually was asked to teach as a layperson in online communities and things like that. And so I actually was doing Dhamma talks and sutta readings a couple of years before I moved to the monastery. And again, not something I sought to do. It was just something I was asked to do. I can remember the first time I was asked to do a sutta, session. And I'm like, I barely know the suttas. Like, I'm confused about all these things. How am I supposed to, help other people understand the suttas when I barely understand them? Obviously, now, all these years later, I'm much more confident in being able to explain probably about 95% of everything in the suttas. There's that 5% where I don't know that I'm anywhere near qualified to talk about. But after all these years, I'm pretty confident in 95% of the suttas. That doesn't mean there's still not a lot for me to learn, because as you get wiser in your path, you see that you read a sutta that you've read 10 times and something clicks in you that you just didn't know. You couldn't understand it. How could one prepare for that? Well, public speaking is good. Right? This is one of the downsides. I'll be honest with you. 90-something% of monk Dhamma talks are just really bad. They just are. I mean, and that's the critical part of me. And believe me, I'm probably more critical of myself than others. Like in those first years when I was giving Dhamma talks, I would watch my recording and I wrote a journal, and I would analyze how many times I said I would analyze my eyes. I'd analyze all of that stuff. So I'm very I can be very critical in that regard, but yeah, most monastics just they're not trained in like things like public speaking or how to give a good Dhamma talk and things like that. That's just not part of their training. Most monastics aren't trained on how to be a good raiser of monastics, right? Like how do you train a good monastic? Most monastics aren't trained in that either. So, and one of my hopes is to, if I do get to the point where people ordain under me and I'm training people, that's going to be part of their training. The public speaking and the how to train other good monastics and all that stuff. That's part of the training, I think. All right. I think I spent enough time on that one, but that's a good question. I enjoy that question. If you're going to teach Dhamma, part of it is public speaking skills, being comfortable with making mistakes, laughing at yourself, all that kind of stuff. And then part of it is knowing the Dhamma, or at least the topic you're going to give a talk about very, very well. That's important. I remember when I first started giving Dhamma talks at Bhavana, I had to talk for an hour. And I would, for each 1 hour Dhamma talk, I probably did about 15 hours of study and molding this talk. And in the early days, I would have like a 7 or 8 page summary, and I'd go through the pages. And then over time, over talking about it more and learning more, then I just have an outline. Then I just have a mind map with just the topic. And now I can just talk about basically anything for at least a half hour. Depending on how broad the topic is, I can go to an hour. No preparation. Doesn't, it's just lots of reps and lots of studying of the Dhamma. So I'm confident in what I say. And if I'm not confident, just like we were talking about the consciousness thing, if I'm not confident, I will say, this is what different teachers say, and this is what I incline to, but take it as you will. So you should, that's important, to be perfectly fine to say, I don't know. Most people in the world don't like to say, I don't know. They think of it's like a sign of weakness. I don't know. Oh, you're so stupid. No. Knowing that you don't know is a good start of knowing that, of wisdom. Not knowing what you don't know is very important. Have I ever had to do alms round by myself? Can you share anything about your experience? I tried to do a charaka, or in the Thai tradition, a tudong. I tried to do I was trying to do a 4-day, but it only lasted 2 days. It's much harder by yourself, especially if you're inexperienced. But in general, it's much harder by yourself because people tend to be more comfortable approaching groups than just one weird bald dude. Who's this weird bald dude, or what are they going to do? If I talk to them, are they going to kill me? Who knows? So yeah. But I don't know that we have enough time for me to. I wrote, if you go to Google and you type in my website and then Charika, I wrote probably like a 15-page article on all kinds of details about my experience. So it says, Dear Bhante, even if one doesn't let go of sensuality and liking to have fun, music or any other things, can someone still develop their path on the side to the point where they make a lot of progress? Sure, of course. Yes, no doubt. You can at least become a stream enter, maybe a once returner. Basically being in the lay life. when you start moving towards non-returner and then arahant, you're looking towards, even if you're a layperson, you're basically living a monastic life, like Gatikara the potter. Johnny says, I wish to share the Dhamma in England. Too hard, uh, but hard to find the correct English words for Dhamma. This is why I just leave words untranslated. Dukkha, tanha. Now, depending on who I'm talking to, like if I'm talking to Buddhist Insights crowd or my own community, I don't need to I don't need to do a lot of defining of the word. But if I am talking to someone where there's lots of newer persons, I will go into a 2 or 3 minute aside explaining the word and how different teachers translate it and things like, just so that they have a breadth of understanding of what the word can mean. And if they see it in English, they know, oh, this is the translation for that Pali. But yeah, it's really hard to translate one Pali word to one English word, especially for the more deeper doctrinal terms. The chronic illnesses that are present in my body cause a disproportionate backlash of pain, exhaustion, nausea, mental and emotional strain when I work. Can you offer guidance on how much pain and impairments to endure? How do I know when my approach is skillful? So, what I would say is you have the mindset of enduring up to the point where you can't anymore, and then it's okay to stop. That's fine. You know, ideally, for mindfulness and investigation purposes, you want to be able to endure as long as you can so you can learn as much as you can from it. But there's no part of the practice where you're like, I don't care if even I'm going to harm myself permanently. I'm going to, you know, endure this. You know, there are some examples of some monastics doing that, but they're rare. And you have actually at least one example where the Buddha talks about, you know, Sona Sutta, where the Buddha talks about how the balance you're supposed to find between your effort and energy and, you know, not going too far. So endure and investigate as long as you can. And when you're done, you're done. It's okay. The idea is to not pushing yourself is important. You cannot reach to the end of this path without pushing yourself. But you need to know when to push, how much to push, and when to let go. Like I like to say that I have the drill sergeant and the hippie therapist in my mind. Sometimes when I need to push myself, the drill sergeant comes in, stop feeling sorry for yourself, get off your ass. Da, 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 da. And sometimes I need the kind therapist. It's okay, you're doing the best you can, take a break, you know. And so you find the balance between the two. And the more you do that, the more wisely you understand when it's time to push and when it's time to break to back off. Right? So that takes some wisdom and some skill and some time to develop. How do you know when your approach is skillful? Well, if you've developed your sila and your conscious is on point, you'll know when you're, if you really look, you'll know when you're not doing as much as you should. Like, I'm using this and this and this as an excuse to not do it. But I really could if I really push myself. And the reverse, obviously. Um, I'm going a bit too far. This is actually moving into unskillful territory. I'm going to stop this. And doing all the crazy endurance events that I did, I've experienced the literal experience of my body shutting down and quitting, and my mind trying to drag my body forward. And so, I reached my limit. I saw that I reached my limit, and I had to stop. Even to this day, a part of my mind is like, man, I wish I didn't stop. But realistically, I had to stop. And so I did. That was the skillful thing to do, was to stop. But then there's other times where I had to push myself. So it's finding that balance. How do you know when your approach is skillful? You look at your mind. See if you're lying to yourself. See if you're justifying something. Then you'll know if it's skillful or not. All right. Well, we've come to the end of the chat. So I'll give it another minute or two to see if any questions pop up. And if no questions pop up, then we're done. Yeah, well, that's good. Keep that Navy SEAL attitude, but also bring in the therapist. Right? The Navy SEAL attitude is good, but it's not the end all be all. Same thing with the therapist. This you see this in a lot. This is how kind of like we raise kids today and all kinds of stuff. It's like this overly therapist thing. It's like, it's okay. We coddle people, and coddling your mind to an overextent is not good. It does not help you. It makes things worse. So sometimes you need the drill instructor. Sometimes you need the coddler. The wisdom is to know when each one is needed. Yeah. Well, listen to your body. Listen to your body. All right, then. I guess we are done. So, as far as I know, I'm going to be doing some more Wednesday sessions coming up. And as of this point, the first 2 weeks in December, I'll be at Empty Cloud. So, you'll be seeing me here and there on the stream until then, as being asked to cover some sessions. And so, until next time, friends, Sukihotu, may you be well and at ease, practice well and be well. May you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again.